Hi, I've come down to Charing Cross Police Station to meet Detective Chief Superintendent Richard Martin, who runs the Specialist Command Unit for Clubs and Vice. I'm just going to ask him some questions about trafficking and prostitution in London. Can you just tell me what it is you do exactly within the police force?
Yeah, I run a OCU called Clubs and Vice, which is a command unit, and we deal with nighttime economy, we deal with violence and gun crime in licensed premises, and we deal with trafficking of human beings into the UK, plus prostitution both on street and off street. And we've also got a unit that deals with obscene publications, so that's sort of extreme pornography and child indecent images of children.
I just want to talk to you about the latest Policy and Crime Act that was passed in 2009.
It doesn't come into the 1st of April. So it's only in draft form at the moment.
Right.
So what we're doing at the moment is we're working with the Crown Prosecution Service to see how we might use this legislation. We do think it'll be useful. Certainly, you know, there are a lot of places that have been running for a number of years and they're quite difficult to close down. And we think this power will help us out quite a lot. So, London being a big city, there are a lot of brothels in London, and obviously the team is a fairly small team. So, you know, we have to prioritise what we do. The unit will always prioritise people that have been trafficked into the UK and children that are found in brothels. So, time we've done that sort of priority, we don't, you know, have the time to close down every brothel in London.
Do you think that legalising brothels, you know, and adding that on to the definition of prostitution would cut down on rape and sexual attacks?
Well, I suppose I'd clarify, prostitution is not illegal in the UK. It's only illegal if you're doing it in a brothel with another person. So if you've got a woman on her own who's selling her body for money... In a room on her own, in a house on her own? She's perfectly legal. There's nothing illegal about that at all.
How does she market herself?
She can market herself in newspapers, she can do the internet, that's not illegal either.
What do you think about this for a suggestion? You have a profession, teacher, lawyer, doctor. Do you think we should make prostitution a profession and do regular health checks and give them a licence to practice, and therefore eliminating this stigma that seems to be attached to it?
I think it's an interesting one. I mean, you know, if you're on your own and you set yourself up, you're actually not committing offence, as we already talked about. I think the problem is, if you look at some of these other countries where they have legalised it, there is still stigma attached to it in New Zealand and places like that, and all the studies say that. The violence is still there. There are still trafficked women being brought in. So those countries that seem to have legalised it, and Holland's another one, you know, the mayor of Amsterdam now saying, I wish you didn't have as many of these places open as they are, hasn't actually worked. So I think it's a very difficult issue, because a lot of women, and our experience is that even if they haven't been trafficked into the country and not being forced, they've normally got something's happened to them in their lives that they've got to the stage where they decide it's a good idea to sell their body. You know, it's normally something traumatic's happened, or they feel they're at rock bottom and nothing, you know. There are not many that pick it as a profession.
Sometimes the money can be good.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at if you look at the pyramid, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage at the top who are what people like to imagine is these high-class kind of cool girls that make thousands of pounds of money. A lot of them have absolutely very horrendous, you know, histories and stories behind them. So I'm not convinced legalising it will take the stigma out of it. So it certainly doesn't seem to have happened like that across the rest of the world.
I don't know if I asked you. I'm not quite sure if I asked you already or not. But do you think it would decrease rape?
Do you mean rape? I'm not sure, because most rapes are committed by men who knew the women they raped. Stranger rape is a very small minority in this country. You know, most people know each other. I'm not convinced that, you know, by paying for a sexual act that would particularly stop rape. And actually, if you look at some of the studies on the girls that are working in the prostitution industry, you know, 50–60% of them will say they've been raped sometime during their career. So, you know, I'm not convinced that will reduce it, because I'm not quite sure that's the driver.
There are sectors of people that I'm very interested in. For example, young guys, and the peer pressure they feel to have sex is enormous. I was talking to some of them earlier on today, just before I came in to talk to you, and I asked 20 of them how scared they were to have sex for the first time, and 14 of them said that they would go to a prostitute rather than try and have sex with a girl for the first time because of the fear.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
It's an interesting, I suppose it's an interesting way of doing it. I've never really thought about that. I mean, one of the studies will show you, or sort of some of the studies will say, that actually a core group of people that use prostitutes all the time are very small. A lot are literally, you know, trying to get sexual experience, I suppose, or do something outside of their relationship. I don't know. I mean, I suppose I'm not that young now. I haven't got that much peer pressure going on, but it's an interesting one, because I mean, some people would say also that they would go with prostitutes, but it's you know, it's got that stigma attached to it. And
how many times do you have to see the car slowing to call that person a curb crawler?
Once.
Just once?
Well, because...
How do you know he's slowing down to ask a prostitute? Because
they approached my officers and asked them for sex, and that's the evidence we need to arrest them for curb crawling.
You can get me to do that one even if you want. I'd love to see how I get on.
Hey, listen, we're after volunteers, special constables, come and help us out.
I'll do that. I interviewed a guy recently who was injured badly in Iraq.
Right.
And sadly, very sadly, I had to have his 2 legs amputated. And he can't find a girlfriend, and the only thing he can do now is use a prostitute. Because it's a natural thing, right?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
What do you think about it? Do you think that's sad? With that in mind, don't you think that it's in that way we should applaud prostitution?
Well, I guess it comes back to that thing at the beginning, you know, prostitution is not illegal. There's nothing to stop that guy, you know, going and finding the services of the woman and do it. The guy won't commit any offence around it. And he can still go and do it legally as well. I mean, he wouldn't commit an offence even if he was found in a brothel at the moment, because there is no offence. So, you know, there's nothing to stop him doing that if that's what he so wishes to do. The only caution I'd ever put on it with people is saying, completely understand that if that's what you want to do, but just make sure the person you're with is not somebody who's being controlled or trafficked into the country and doing it against their will.
Okay. I just want to ask you about the international law that was passed, that was originally passed 2003 in Palermo in Italy, about trafficking, right? And then since that 117 countries, including ourselves, have since been affiliated to this law, which was passed in 2009. Ours, we seem to have taken a much more looser definition than what it would then, because the original law was quite severe. And when our Sexual Offences Act was passed in 2003, it's a much looser definition. What's your opinion on this act?
I think the 2003 legislation is extremely effective. It allows us to do quite a lot of work around it. And I think where it goes probably broader than the Palermo Protocol originally set out is that, you know, for instance, if you were in this country now and you rang up somebody, let's say from Eastern Europe, and you said, look, would you like to come work as a prostitute over here? I will pay your fare over, I will pay you to come over, I'll set some rates for you to allow it to happen. And she said, yes, I'm quite happy to do that. She's been trafficked. So,
but if she says yes, has she been trafficked?
Yes, she has, because it's the arranging.
It's consensual.
Doesn't matter. That's where the legislation is more broad, because it's about a person who's facilitating people coming into this country.
So the Joe Bloggs that rang her, can he be arrested?
Yeah, he'd be arrested as the trafficker, because he's paid for the flight. He's arranged for her to come over. So it's actually that arranging, almost that facilitation.
What about her getting into the UK and getting her passport and marrying some bloke that she meets and everybody lives happily ever after? Is that not what happens a lot of the time?
Not that I'm aware of, but obviously we don't look at their marital status. So, but you know, it's not just women that come here and are tricked, and that happens quite a lot.
Right.
It's not just the women that are forced into it. But obviously, if it's been arranged for them to come over, it's that arranging, controlling, because the way the law is coming from is that if that person hadn't tried to arrange it, and it's obviously for his benefit, he's going to make a lot of money out of it. If he hadn't arranged it and got that person over, then she wouldn't have been brought into prostitution in this country. So that's where the UK has stretched it wider than perhaps
How do you
Palermo.
track the traffickers? How do you find them? Have you got a system?
Yes.
How do you do it?
Well, a lot of what we do is undercover work. So we do a lot of intelligence operations. We will get intelligence from the internet, from newspapers, from perhaps from previous jobs.
Do you send people undercover?
Yes. All the time.
And how successful is it to catch them?
We've never lost a case in the last 20 years.
Brilliant.
And we probably at the moment have 11 live trafficking operations that are running. So I have 11 operations at the moment where I've got surveillance officers out and undercover officers deployed.
Crikey. Nick Davis from The Guardian wrote an article about trafficking, a huge article, which was done by Kelly and Regan, two professors in London University. And they were trying to, the study was about how many girls are here at the moment illegally, being trafficked, and they came up with this crazy figure of 1,420, and then it sort of went a bit nuts and went to 4,000. I mean, is there a number? No, there isn't. I mean, the reason there isn't a number is that trafficking by its very nature is often hidden behind closed doors. We know the cases that we find and that we prosecute, of course, and we can say how many cases we've prosecuted in the last 12 months, whatever it might be. But that's not to say we know what the full picture is, and we don't. Because not every woman that is working off street in a brothel has been trafficked, but then again some have. So there is a balance here, but the problem is it's very difficult to know the right numbers, because you've got to know where all the market is in the first place, then to be able to spend the time talking to the women to understand where they're trafficked. Because if you walked into Soho now and you walked into 20 brothels and you asked every woman directly and said, have you been trafficked? She would say no. Of course they would, because they're afraid.
Correct.
But why don't you get a woman, an undercover woman, any woman, me, anyone, and send them into the place where you know there's trafficking, and let her spend a week or so there. I'm sorry, I mean, whatever happens, I don't know, right? I'm like this. This is just a plan in my head, and ask her to ask all the people in there if they're trafficked, and then make a hit then, and sort of,
Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm quite limited in what I could ask my officers to do, as you can imagine, and I don't think they actually signed up. So hey, who knows? It's a one
even
world.
For a day.
But we have other ways of doing it. In fairness, I have a dedicated brothels team that goes in and talks to them and builds up trust. Now,
but how can you let an undercover police person into a brothel? How does the brothel owner know that they are legit?
Well, most of them don't ask. We go in with money, and we pay money to go into a room with a woman.
Okay, so you go in as a pretend
as a
person,
client.
as a pretend client.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then how does the prostitute take that? The girl is sitting there. The next thing you've got this guy. Obviously, it's a guy, and he says, "By the way, I don't need your services. I'm here to talk to you about your profession."
No, that's not the way to do it. There are other ways. When we deploy undercover officers, it's very much about building up a case. So we'll already know who we think's controlling the brothel.
Okay.
What we're doing is proving the prostitution. So somebody's made an offer of prostitution.
Yeah.
Then we'll track their bank accounts. Then we'll track their movements.
Okay,
and find
fine.
where they go. So it's part of a wider operation. It's part of a wider operation. But the bit you talk about how do we know women are trafficked? You know, this is some of the challenge. But the brothel team we've got at the moment, they go in very overtly. They tell them they're police officers.
Yeah.
You know, the last month we've had 2 women come in with the cards we've left and said, "Yes, I've been trafficked. Can you help me?" So it's about building up that trust and doing it gently, because we don't want to compromise them in that brothel, because if there were police officers and then they came across and they get beaten up by the pimp afterwards, you know, we're culpable for that, and we don't want that to happen to the victim.
No, absolutely. Yeah, the police have formed this Operation Pentameter. How successful has that been, and what's it about?
Pentameter is a national run programme. Okay. It was led by Tim Brain, who's the Chief Constable of Gloucestershire. Okay. And that was very much about I think all forces were going out to do operations to try and see whether they could find trafficked women in there. I suppose the challenge with that, again, is it comes back to my point, is that you can walk into a load of premises and the women won't tell you they're trafficked until they feel safe. So I think I'm not convinced how effective that type of operation is, because I think you've got to know your local area. London is very different to Manchester or Merseyside or somewhere like that. You've got to be able to take women out of that environment before they trust you. So, you know, a carte blanche, you know, just going into a door and asking someone, I'm not convinced that that's probably the right way to do it.
And just another question, do you think that trafficking is going to increase based on the society we live in? Or do you think that it'll stay as it is, or it'll decrease? Or how do you feel that it's...
If I was that good at predicting, I think I would put the lottery numbers on Saturday. The honest answer is we don't know. I mean, we don't know the full extent of trafficking. That's why we're working very hard to try and find it out. I don't know if it will grow. It's constant. That's what I can say. We're taking out some of the big networks at the moment around it, but I don't really know whether it will grow or not. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the drivers for trafficking normally is that people in their own home country don't feel they've got the opportunities over there, therefore they're more susceptible to move. So
it's a key for them to freedom.
Absolutely. So it's very difficult, and I suppose it really depends on, you know, how effective those countries are at putting in strategies to help their own citizens.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Richard, thank you so much for talking to me
pleasure.
today. I really appreciate it, and no doubt I'll be back for more. Thanks
You're
very
more than
much.
welcome.
Thanks a million.